Welcome to our Animal Justice Academy Lunchtime Live. Today, our topic is educating students about factory farming with Monica Chen from Newz Institute. I'm Kimberly Carroll. I'm the director of Animal Justice Academy. And just welcome to all you vibrant beings here. Welcome to those of you who are watching the replay, whether you are someone who has a young person in your life, whether you are a young folk yourself, or whether you're wanting to do advocacy with youth, the youth space, or just if you need a hit of hope right now in this movement. I'm glad you joined us. I want to just introduce Monica Chen, give you the official background on Monica. She's the executive director of Newz Institute, formerly known as the Factory Farming Awareness Coalition, where she's overseen the development of a unique series of educational programs. So Newz educates high school and college students on the devastating impacts of factory farming and supports them as they become advocates for a just and sustainable food system. Monica serves as an advisor to Scarlet Spark, the Animal Defense Partnerships, and AVA Summit. She's a veteran teacher who taught environmental education to students at the elementary, middle, and high school levels. And in addition to classroom teaching, Monica has worked in prisons, crisis support services, and residential environmental education. Monica, welcome, my friend.
Thanks so much, Kimberly. Excited to see all of you.
It is awesome to see you. I've been following your work for a long time, and so I'm really happy to have you on here. And this is, I think, one of the reasons we have a lot of folks showing up today, at lunchtime is a lot of folks are wondering, how do we start changing the future? How do we change these systems on a large level? And I've always said, oh my God, the youth is everything. The young folks are everything. And I really don't feel like we have enough centered on that in our movement. And so your organization is just, it's like a glass of tall, beautiful water to me. So Monica, can you give us a little background on how the Newz Institute came to be? And it started off with a different name. So give us a little history here.
That's true. I actually don't even think Factory Farming Awareness Coalition was our first name.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but that's what we were known for a very long time. It was started in 2010 by Katie Cantrell, who I know has already been part of the Lunchtime Lives. And she was a student at UC Berkeley. And she recognized that back then, there wasn't a lot of educational outreach in schools. So she went up to the UC Berkeley professors, the sororities, the co-ops, and she said, I would like to make this connection. And what they were called presentations at the time. They were just so well received that we were really able to grow all over.
Wow. Wow. Okay. So tell me a little bit about why you feel, I mean, I just told you why I feel about it, but in more detail, why do you feel high school and post-secondary students are so important to reach in particular in this movement? And why young adults, why youth as opposed to elementary? So give us a
Yeah.
little rundown of that.
It's so interesting because I'm worried that people think I'm ageist because we focus on high school and college students only. And that is not true. It's a very deliberate choice. And I think that education to all age groups is really critical. We choose not to work with elementary school students because the level of curriculum that you're able to get to, like the in-depth discussion about what's happening on factory farms, is really limited at the elementary school level.
Right.
And parents do get very concerned when children want
Yes.
to go vegan. And of course, that's a shame because children tend to be the folks that are very open to hearing about something and then immediately changing. There are organizations that are able to do that. A lot of that is like very limited to like humane education. They do a lot more of like connecting the students to an animal like a dog and just building that relationship, which is great. It's a start. But we want to work with high school and college students in part because those are students who are really figuring out what they want to do with their careers. They're looking for interest. They're looking for purpose. They're ready to make some changes, and family members, friends are more open to that. And I also really like working with this population because they're so easy to access. You can throw out, and spend a lot of money on Instagram ads. People can just flip through it, right? I mean, you can just like change channels. You can choose not to read an article, great article today in the New York Times, right? But with a class where your teacher, who you respect as an authority figure, has brought in a Newz educator and you are there for the entire time listening about the impacts of factory farming, that's powerful. And I really also want to emphasize the importance of working with the next generation because I do not think that we're going to achieve animal liberation or the end of factory farming in 2 years, right? Like I'm thinking about like how this is going to require generations of work, how we need to be changing our timeline and really looking towards other social justice movements. I can point to many other social justice movements where your experience has been very different over the last 10, 20, 50, hundreds of years. And you see that as an example in the feminist movement, right? Civil rights movement, et cetera. So when you are looking at that longer timeline, of course, you're thinking about the next generation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we'd be pretty dumb not to be doing that. And I love that. I mean, honestly, we have a captive audience. It's when we're talking about classrooms. You know, I always talk about I jokingly talk about captive audiences, but you know, in this day and age of just incredible amounts of data and information coming at us, it's really important to have people in a place where they have to concentrate on something. So
Yeah,
I
there's
love
no
that.
opting in.
No, no,
Like
exactly. There is
everybody
no
here, you
opting in.
opted into this. Like, thank you so much for being here. I do not take
Yes.
that for granted.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Thank you for recognizing that. I need to recognize that more because an hour of somebody's time is pretty valuable these days. So I love that. Okay, so can we get down? Okay, let's talk about first of all the program that is the most visible that New Roots Institute does, which is going into the high schools and post-secondary colleges and universities. Let's talk a little bit about that just to sort of hang our hat on. And I know that there's a lot of strategy and sort of an ecosystem around that, but let's start with that and just get a little bit more people a little bit more informed of that. So how do the school presentations work? You know, like how do they first of all get into the schools?
Yeah, well, the first part of our strategy, and it's a four-part strategy, is educate. And that means that we are trying to get physically onto high school and college classrooms in our hub regions. My colleague Brees is also, I noticed on this call, Brees is very happy to answer questions in the chat, nominating him.
Wonderful.
So if you have any questions about what our hubs are, et cetera, like please feel free to ask that in the chat. We are able to connect with teachers from using cold emails. We are able to table at fairs and connect with teachers that might want to bring us in. A lot of times teachers at a school are really good about connecting us with other teachers, which is phenomenal. I was just looking at one of the high schools that I visited back in 2018. And since then, we've been there like 130 times. I was so impressed. So I can assure you,
Wow.
every single kid at this 3,000 person high school has heard about the impacts of factory farming.
Wow, unbelievable. And just so that we're clear, you have New Roots has done 10,000 presentations so far, and has had in their, you know, in their classrooms, 300,000 people, is it?
Yeah, I think it's almost 400,000 at this point. Yeah,
Whoa,
and we
amazing.
also changed away from just calling them presentations to really leading Socratic style seminars. We're very
I love it.
careful about tailoring our message. And I think that this is key, especially because I know that there are other humane educators on this call today. We do
Yeah.
not go into a classroom and deliver the same presentation to a ninth grader versus to like an MBA class. It's really important that we're meeting the standards. And if you really want to talk about behavior change, me just like saying like here's all these facts is not going to really resonate with our students. It has to be stories. It has to be the students answering for themselves why they find this problematic, why they are eating animal products, why this is contributing to a larger problem. Like it has to come from them. It has to be interactive.
Yeah, so I love that. Like, and that's one of my big questions that I get curious about. And I know we have a lot of educators in this crew. I'm reading through some of the chats. We have people who are doing humane education, who are doing speaking at schools and high schools. So this is great. I'm curious about a little bit more about the content. Can you tell us more about the content? Who developed it? How did you decide on the focus? I mean, again, and also your focus on factory farming as opposed to animal advocacy. You know, like humane education is a very wide net. And then you've got people going in to talk about animal advocacy, and you're specifically going in and decided to, again, hang your hat on that, on the factory farming specifically.
Yes, and that was really strategic.
Yeah.
There's a lot of negative connotations with certain words. And the good thing about factory farming is that everybody's against it. People who have a very limited understanding of animal agriculture are like, oh, factory farming is bad. So that gives us access to those classrooms that we wouldn't have access to if we had a more specific animal name. So that's
Mm-hmm.
point number one. And then you asked about our content. We have a library of slides of, I think, over 1,000 slides at this point, because we've been asked about to connect to so many very specific topics, right? Whether it's methane digesters or very specific zoonotic disease that originated in, whatever country it is. Like, we have the information on that. And I'm really impressed by the entire educational outreach team. And I already shouted out Brees earlier, is they have done a great job of making sure that our facts are very credible and we're citing our primary sources. One of my big concerns in this movement has always been the exaggeration of facts, which does not help us at all, especially if you're thinking about the audiences that we are talking with. So it's very important
Mm-hmm.
that we have a range of slides that we are able to tailor to every single class to meet the needs of those students and that teacher in terms of content.
Mm. Yeah, I'm absolutely with you. The hyperbole, for the attention that it gets and the exaggerations, it in the end damages us far more than it helps us. So give me a little sense. Somebody's asking in the chat. So how do you get it to come from students? How do you so if a teacher were to book you in,
Mhm.
would your educator have a little chat with the teacher, get a bit of a sense of the demographics and the interests? Is that how it works?
Well, our educators do know the demographics very well of the various schools and hubs that they are a part of. And that's important because inevitably, when you get to why we are eating animal products, culture comes up. And just telling people like to ignore that does not go well. So it is important that we understand the demographics. That's very key. Um, Carrie, I really appreciate you noting that exaggeration is not required. The facts are staggering enough. Yes, that is true.
Exactly. Yeah.
In our lessons, we always have to give an overview of what factory farming is, and that does include the confinement of these animals. And we are very selective in the images that we choose to use, just showing again like how closely packed these animals are. And I have to say that of every single section, and we have, I don't even know how many tens of thousands of survey data points at this stage, but that animal section really does resonate with students, no matter what the subject area is, whether it's a health class or an environmental class. It's talked about a business class where you're talking about horizontal and vertical integration. Like, what's happening to these animals is disturbing. And from there, we go into the very tailored subject areas, and we also get into the solutions. And we're talking about how can we affect change on an individual, institutional, like at their school, and a systemic level. And the kids have to literally brainstorm why some of these changes are not happening, what the barriers are, how they can be overcome. And that is not something that I, as an educator, can just like tell them. They really need to recognize these patterns for themselves.
So it's very interactive. It's very much getting them to do some critical thinking around this,
Mhm.
and to do some problem solving around it. So yeah, that's amazing. You said that students tend to react strongly in the animal section, but I just wonder generally what's the experience of how after 300,000 for almost 400,000 students, what's the general sort of reaction? That's or the types of the range of reactions.
It's so funny when we come in. There have been times in the past where kids have come in wearing bacon costumes. They're like so ready to just fight us. And the thing is, like, we don't tell people to do anything. That's kind of our
Mm.
charm. We are funny. We connect with our students and we meet them where they're at. And again, factory farming is so egregious. We speak to ranching communities. Like, some of these students like actually are using animals like in their family businesses, and they still come to these lessons and after interacting with us are like, whoa, this is disturbing. I did not understand like the scope of what's going on. So I'd say that in general, 90+% of the people who take our surveys are indicating that they would want to support legislation to end factory farming. Very similar numbers indicate that they want to change what they're eating. Of course, that's really difficult, sometimes when you're only 15 years old, but like it's there, that seed is definitely planted.
Mm, that is so heartening to hear. Can I just ask you, how long are the seminars generally? Do they have a common duration?
It depends. So we send pre-work ahead of time, and then there's always all the post-curriculum follow-up. We have an extensive list of resources, including the Raw and Truth series that's available on YouTube that I would encourage everybody here to check out to just there get like a bit of flavor, some kind of understanding of how we're approaching this work. And the actual lessons themselves that occur in person can vary in length. I'd say a typical class period is an hour. Sometimes it's longer.
Okay. That's a lot. It's a lot to be able to impart in a really short amount of time. So your teachers must be, your educators must be really on the ball. Like, tell me a little bit about your educators. Tell me about like how where they're coming from, how you train them, that sort of thing.
Yeah, Brees put in the chat where we have some of our active hubs right now. Brees is in Ohio. We also have Keith in Michigan, and we have Claire in New York, Natalie in Los Angeles. We've been in the Bay Area, which is where we started since 2010. We've got San Diego. We actually have somebody in Portland, Maine right now. So those are the folks that really go through our entire training program. Our onboarding process to work at Newz Institute, I'm told, is quite extensive. This is not a simple, here is a 20 slide deck and just go and deliver it kind of situation. And if you think about, we haven't talked yet about the leadership program, but for our students that we're training to give some of these presentations or lessons in their schools, I mean, we train them for an entire summer, and then we continue on during the academic year, because you have to be really humble when you're doing this work. You have to be able to push. You have to know how to push without people getting upset. Like there's a real art to teaching, which every teacher knows.
But especially when you've got something as charged as this, and a topic that a lot of people don't want to hear about, right? I mean, I didn't want to hear a lot about math in high school, but I might have even, I mean, it would have been really hard to hear about this. So,
You know, though, like I actually feel like the students of today are just looking for purpose and this feeling like they can do something. I don't know if
yeah.
you've talked to students who've like dealt with multiple years of pandemic schooling and just like
Mm,
the depression and the anxiety. I actually think that New Roots gives them something to actually focus on. And when we go through those environmental slides and look at Project Drawdown and you look at what you can do, I mean, what kind of kid can make a change to refrigerant management, which is one of the top solutions to addressing climate change, right? But like with your food and thinking about how you can influence others, the ability to influence others in this like whole age of influencers is fascinating to me, because it's no longer about the animals that I'm saving. It's really about how I'm influencing others. I give this example of like after a lesson, if you and your friends go out to Burger King, if you choose to get the vegan Impossible Whopper, assuming that's available, what influence does that have on the people around you, your friend group? What if multiple folks, after hearing this lesson, choose to get that vegan Impossible Whopper? What impact does that have? And conversely, what if all of your friends order the vegan Impossible Whopper? If you're truly honest with yourself, knowing what you know after this lesson today, how comfortable do you feel ordering the meat burger? So again, just like really illustrating the power of influence. We talk a lot about the Tabitha Browns of this world, but really thinking about like who influences other people. It's the people in our networks. And that's why there's this very strong message of each of us is uniquely positioned to create change within our communities.
And we absolutely, that's one of the cornerstones at Animal Justice Academy too, is you don't need to come to an urban area and hold a sign on a street to affect change. You start exactly where you are in whatever circles, communities, job, whatever, and there are ways for you to be able to advocate for animals. So that's amazing. And
Can I
I
just say,
love,
I'm actually like really excited about that point, because there was a time, even when I was in college, where I felt like if I wanted to advocate for animals, that meant that I needed to like be out there with a bullhorn. And that was like all I could do, or I could only
yeah,
leaflet.
yeah,
And I appreciate everybody who does that work. But what's
yeah.
really amazing now, when we think about theories of change and culture shift and how this is going to take generations, and like all the people that are involved in these different industries. Like if you look at something like Ringling Brothers, like there was new technology like Cirque du Soleil, there are people protesting, education, undercover investigations, you know, there's so much that goes into a successful campaign. And I'm really excited that with our students, no matter what major, no matter what class, there are ways for you to help this entire movement through your work.
Absolutely. A well-placed vegan is gold, right?
Those allies, oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
yeah. And you just with another organization I do some work with, we managed to get in and change something on like this in the system of a major city because there happened to be a vegan in just not a high position, but in just the right place to make, you know, open the pathways. And so yeah, so being able to plant those seeds everywhere, it's super important. And so and I guess it's also really exciting because, for example, eating plant-based is one of the few things that people can do instantly. They don't have to wait for their government. They don't need to wait for their, you know, like their social circle. They don't need to wait for anything to be able to make a change like that. That's actually really impactful. So that must be something that really appeals to that age group.
Yeah, again, like that individual dietary change piece
Yeah.
is for sure.
It's huge. Okay, so let's pedal back a little bit to the four sort of cornerstones of New Roots. Now that we just touched on the first one, which is educate, but this goes a lot deeper. So can you give us just an overall look at the New Roots Institute strategy?
Yeah. So when we're going into these classrooms, we're encouraging that behavior change on an individual level. We're also recruiting students into our leadership program. And we train these students to run campaigns at those same schools where we've already been educating. So when a fellow is running a campaign such as pushing for 50% plant-based at UCLA, or trying to change the upcharges on you know, plant-based milk products at Cornell, they are part of a community where the student body is generally more receptive, in part because there's educators who are giving lessons. It's really creating the environment for that change to occur, that culture shift within the school. Our students are also being positioned to be in those positions that you talked about earlier, Kimberly. Like if you think about what we've been able to do with New York City and public hospitals, right? Katie Cantrell was just on here talking about that. Having those key allies is important. Like we talk about the levers for social change. How are we going to get these people in government? How do we make sure that they're positioned within the USDA, working in law? I mean, I'm so excited for the conference that's coming up. Like we really can leverage people a lot more. It's not just, as I was saying earlier, only leafleting or only, you know, protesting. Like those are important, and there's ways to get even more people involved, and that's what I'm excited about. So the 4 phases of our strategy are educate, recruit, train, and position.
Okay, so you're using the classrooms, you have access to all of these folks, and then you're putting it out there that there is opportunities to go deeper into this in a more formalized way. Is that what's happening?
Yep.
And then what happens?
So we're giving our lessons. The end of the lesson does include a pitch right before they take the surveys. And about 30% of the students in our classrooms indicate that they want to do much more than just change their own diets and just support legislation. Like they want to take active roles in this. We do not accept all students into our leadership program. This summer, we had about 84. And those students really go through an intensive training that includes meeting the movement, learning how to connect their issues to factory farming, learning how to talk to the sustainability director on their campus. And during the academic year, we accept some fellows into a program where they're working on campaigns with our partner organizations. And this is a really key thing to understand about our strategy. We know that New Roots Institute by ourselves cannot do all of this. But what we can do is we can help supply students. We can help supply the next generation into all these incredible advocacy organizations. So we've worked with groups like Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, Better Food Foundation on the default. All those organizations need people on the ground, and they work with our students, and we create all the structure for it so that those campaigns can be successful. And a quick note about that, our students are very capable, but they need structure in order to succeed. And I'm also really excited that over the summer, we accepted students from more international countries. And that means that we are actually able to supply students, bring in leaders outside of the United States as well.
I love that. Okay, good, because as you know, Animal Justice is based in Canada, so we do have a lot of Canadians joining us today, and so I know there's going to, and we don't have anything like this in Canada, Monica. It's really scattershot. There's some wonderful humane educators, some people that are like Jason Fonger,
Shout out
who's
Jason.
yeah, Jason's doing great stuff, but Jason's only one person, amazing person, force to be reckoned with, but yeah, so it's yeah, that's really, I would love to see New Roots come on up to where we are. Okay, so tell us a little bit more about the fourth step then. So we've got training, and then the fourth step
is positioning.
yeah.
So we have about 550 alumni fellows at this point, which is impressive because we really only started to work on this stage of having the fellowship program back in 2019, was the first iteration. So it hasn't even been 5 years fully yet. And about 17% of those alums are still in school, and the others are out there in the world. And what's key is, yes, some of them work for mission aligned organizations. Like you look at many of the nonprofits in our space, we have alums in a lot of those spaces. I'm also really excited, though, to not limit students just to that. Like, we need people in those mission adjacent organizations, whether they're working at the
Absolutely.
Sierra Club or Justice, public health organizations, and they're able to bring that lens of anti-factory farming. We also have students who are working in government and the corporate spaces as well, which also I think is so key.
Yeah, it's incredible. Yeah, that's 500 and what did you say, 550?
550, yeah.
That is 550 really powerful seeds that are now sprouting. So
And the key
that's
thing is we also talk a lot about leadership to not just mean like, oh, I'm a leader and everybody follows me. Like we are
mm,
very clear that we need all of us to empower other people. So each
yeah.
of our students knows after coming out of our fellowship program, your job is not to be the leader at the front, but to empower the people around you so
Mm.
that they can then train the trainers as well.
So can you give some examples of places where like specific examples of where those seeds are sprouting, and some examples of how that's showing up, kind of thing?
Yeah, I was just in Los Angeles this past weekend and I got to meet so many of our fellows there and they were throwing, various events and I was just so impressed because they never called anything like the New Roots Institute event. They really were good about bringing in a lot of different organizations, whether it's the Plant Futures Club or, an alt protein chapter and really various animal welfare groups. It was very exciting to me to see that they really recognized that they needed to like amplify the voices of others. And that's just led to, again, just so many great successes. UCLA is one of the like top schools I would talk about when I'm thinking about like a shift towards more plant-based eating. They achieved that 50% commitment with HSUS. So that's exciting. I also look at a
Mm.
school like NYU, New York University, and we have actually had several staff members who were students or grad students. And I've been really impressed by how their plant-based food festival, as an example, really grew into something big. And now it's been taken over by the Office of Sustainability, which means that's no longer something that's like fringe and just being done by students, but it's actually being adopted. And I see a lot of potential to connect what we're doing with the Scope 3 emissions work that NYU is doing. So those are just two examples off the top of my head.
I love it. Okay, I want to dive a little bit more into some of how that is all growing, but I just also want to mention to our community here, if you have a specific question that you'd like us to address, maybe just in the chat do a star Q, just so that we can really see that it's a question as opposed to just a comment or opinion, and we will try to address some things here. Monica, There are folks here, I'm sure, that have young people in their life, and they are, or they're dealing with young people on a regular basis, and they are trying to get through to them in terms of animal rights, factory farming. Do you have any tips for them, or what are some of the resources that you recommend, that age group be pointed towards?
Well, the first thing that I think is really important is connection. Prior to even working in this space, I remember working at Nature Bridge, which is the largest residential environmental education partner with the National Park Service. And I'd bring all these kids on these incredible hikes, and we'd look out over at the vistas. And sometimes it would just sort of like end there. But I believe that it was important because we could not jump into talking about greenhouse gases and how we're going to end climate change if the students didn't have a connection to nature, if they didn't appreciate life. So I do think that it's important to connect students to animals. And I'm so grateful. I mean, I even see Nisha and Jeremy, like you're representing a sanctuary. Like those are what really wonderful opportunities. There's books there. There's just ways to engage students over the dinner table about why you're making the choices you are. And I think that that's a really wonderful place to start. There's many organizations that have put out some really phenomenal resources. And I think that we might even have some available on website, but if not, you can always just Google them too. And then in terms of like organizations that you can point folks to, it really depends a bit on where you are. Somebody was mentioning the LEAP program earlier, which is an alternative to 4-H, and that's wonderful if that's near you. I know that not a lot of people are necessarily near a LEAP program. So the good thing about Newz Institute's Leadership Academy, that first phase of the leadership program, is that it is accessible to students all over the world. Like I do not limit it, or we do not limit it to like any one specific place. So that's been a huge advantage of doing things virtually.
Can you explain a little bit more about the LEAP program?
The LEAP program?
Yeah, what is that?
My understanding is that, and I'm very lucky because I live right next to Animal Place, which is one of the LEAP sites. And they actually bring teenagers, high school students to the sanctuaries to learn more about animals. And that's really special because for many students, there's 4-H is one of the greatest opportunities they have to connect with animals. And then at the end of that program, those animals are sold and slaughtered, and that's really heartbreaking. So this is an opportunity for people who want to spend time with animals to do so without necessarily having to, what does Miyoko say, like betray your best friend?
I'm just gonna jump into a couple of the questions here that have come up. Let's see here, just around teaching. Jeremy and Nisha are asking just a little bit more about the seminars. I wonder how presenters navigate the audience going away with a happy meat animal use message, focusing on treatment rather than abolition. So wondering if that is, how you handle the sort of happy meat thing, and also wondering what kind of support programs they are referred to, such as Challenge 22 and things like that. So yeah, are there particular programs that, first of all, about the message about happy meat, and then the second question is about, is there sort of like an action program for plant-based eating that people can go to afterwards?
Well, first of all, when we intro the factory farming section, like what this is, we show some stats, right? Like how many animals, 10 billion in the United States. What percentage do you think are raised in factory farms? The answer is 99%. And I will say that's the reason why I do this work, because every time I'm going to a grocery store, every time I'm going to a restaurant, like 99% of the time, like it's coming from these kinds of situations. And then we talk about some of these labels that people see, whether it's cage-free, free range, et cetera. And we show literal photos of what those farms look like. So I think that that really does put into perspective what is going on at this scale. And I also keep in mind that this is an hour. You cannot get 100% of a class to like have the same understanding of animal liberation that you might have in an hour. I think again, because I used to put so much pressure on myself of like, there's so much terrible stuff happening. Like this needs to end now. And I'm so grateful for getting older. I love being older, where I can really understand, like, I've been with Newz Institute now for almost 7 years. And I think about all those other movements, like, you cannot just expect everything to be perfect after an hour or even in a year during an annual report time. Like, I really am able to think long term. And that has been just such a gift to really understand how social change happens.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely that's something I've been really thinking about a lot more lately. Is just if we're playing this knowing that this is a long game, what would we do differently? Like what would we do differently as opposed to having to, it's got to happen right now, right? No matter what, and no matter what. Yeah, it's just an interesting question for everyone to consider. Like, realistically, this is not going to be changed in the next 5 years. So in that case, how do we play? How do we play for, if we know we have years to sort of build and get better and better and better, and get more effective? How do we do that? So that's interesting, and it's good to know that
This
that's
is
what you're
seriously
thinking about.
something we should be talking about, because the people who think that this is going to end in 2 years are very clear on the types of interventions that they want to be working on right now. And DXE had a song about this all ending in 40 years. Again, very different idea of like what we should be focusing on right now, versus myself, who's thinking a much longer timeline. And I also encourage every advocate to be thinking about what the ripple effects are going to be. As an aside, I have lived near San Francisco, Chinatown for a pretty long time. And there were some activists who really cared about liberating the animals within this Chinatown, in some of these live animal markets. Terrific stuff that's going on. 100% get that. But because there was so much emphasis on freeing those animals, like immediately, what might not have been fully thought about was what the pushback would be, like how this would be viewed as something that's very racist to be targeting these Chinese store owners as opposed to Fisherman's Wharf, which is a mile away. And so then it became like this very political thing where, like, if you're talking about this as a politician, you don't want to be associated with it because it's considered racist. So there's so many, I know that this is kind of a weird example, but I've just been really interested in examining what actions we're taking and thinking about the future. And I know it's just so hard because we care about the animals that are suffering like immediately in front of us. But as I think about like those levers of social change, right? And I'm thinking about like who are the allies that we're going to need, it's just sort of like gets me to ask more questions. And I think that asking questions, and being willing to be pushed into, I'm very open to being wrong all the time at this point in my life. I just know that there's limits to what I know, and I really love engaging with people who push my thinking.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I think about this in terms of war, of just the trouble that we get into in this world when we're impatient on any level. And again, I get it. I think it was Teresa said, but there's so many animals suffering now, and absolutely. And it's really about how are we going to be the most effective? How are we going to be able to save, to spare the most animals from the agony that they're experiencing? So it's not about being patient. It's not about, it's about how do we make this work better for animals? So, and again, we're just putting that out there as a thought experiment. Speaking of pushback, Ken is asking, the USDA does presentations in schools and universities in the US. Has there been any pushback or conflict there? And he was saying the dairy industry does the same in Canada. The industry groups, the lobby groups, have no problem getting into the schools here in Canada, Monica. We, on the other hand, have a hell of a time. So,
yeah. First of all, thanks to all of you who just send me emails like showing this terrible like programs where they bring a cow and all that kind of stuff. It's very upsetting. If I ever need to be depressed, I appreciate but it's the reality of what's happening, and it's just so well funded, and it's very heartbreaking. Newz Institute has definitely persevered since 2010, and we know what we're up against. But yes, it's very hard. I have been surprised sometimes by how little pushback there is to some of those other presentations and workshops that occur.
Well, and that is another question that came up that is interesting. Shelley is asking, oh no, sorry, Dana is asking, what advice would you have for those of us doing presentations in elementary schools about plant-based food systems and humane education? How can we give this information to students inside of a school without parent pushback? And thank you so much for this presentation.
Oh, so sweet. I have done a lot. So I started off as a third grade teacher, classroom teacher. And so I'm very aware of the challenges. And I'm appreciative of organizations like Farm Sanctuary that had some very specific programming for the younger students. And that included, bringing in the VR goggles as well. There's an art to it. And I think that if you are connected with a sanctuary or able to talk about a sanctuary, that's a really strong, motivating factor that brings that the teachers want to bring you in because they want to connect the students to animals. People love animals. And then as much as you're able to tell stories, like you have to be able to tell stories, especially with that age group, but really all age groups. Like you cannot just be like, here's the brutal thing that happens all the time. It's like, this is Moo and here is Moo's life and here's where Moo's at now. And this is how we help Moo, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's great. There is okay, so I do want to sort of talk about the fact that we don't have anything like New Roots in Canada. And so there are people here who are asking, do you have any suggestions? Do you have any suggestions on what we could do sort of piecemeal here? Shelley is asking, well, Shelley's asking, is there any New Roots Institute representation in Canada? And I know that there's no official, but can you speak to if there's any other sort of resources through either New Roots or someone else that if we were wanting to do more of this in Canada, they could reference?
Well, we actually did used to be in Canada. We had several folks in Canada out there at one
I didn't know
point.
that.
And yeah, we were just struggling, in the early days of Factory Farming Awareness Coalition, and demand has always been a challenge in some places. What I've learned is that just being, first of all, if you are a passionate animal activist, like love you so much, I think it's amazing. But that itself is not the sell. That is not how you get into the classrooms, right? Like, because there is no animal rights class in a typical high school. Like there's an environmental science class, there's a health class. So you have to be able to meet the standards of that particular class. And that's what's really important. And that's what I think you really need to emphasize in your outreach emails, and with your personal connections as well. If you actually know teachers yourself, like that's really the way to get in.
And is there, what is the best way to sort of present oneself, to be able to speak to your knowledge, to be able to speak to if you have experience in schools in the past? What are some of the pieces that people should remember, and people that might be naturally aligned to doing this?
Yeah. Well, first of all, there's many interventions that we can be taking, right? Like I said, that like if you want to be doing corporate work, advocating at LinkedIn or the New York City Public Hospitals, if you want to be a lawyer working on policy work, if you want to be working in government, if your skills really align with journalism, and if you are a teacher, because I do think that you have to be a very strong public speaker, you need to have really solid behavior management down. You cannot just go into classroom and expect to talk and people will listen to you. So really that teaching experience is key, and really improves your credibility as well. If you want to be the person who's like going into schools, like you could probably go, if you are the parent in a Girl Scout troop, it's probably pretty easy for you to try and connect to that Girl Scout troop because you have a natural in. And that's why I keep on trying to emphasize that we don't need to fit our advocacy work to something that's not in our skill set or where we don't have connections. The point of me saying earlier that each of us is uniquely positioned to create change is because you do things every single day where you have influence, and you're just not, it's very possible that you might not be fully taking advantage of that. I actually do one lesson with the fellows where I list all of the different things that I'm a part of. I'm a big Harry Potter fan, so I'm part of like these various groups on Harry Potter, and there's a very strong animal connections in Harry Potter. I am flying on certain airlines. I'm like, what is up with the lack of plant-based options on these airlines? And I'm able to talk, like, there's so many ways in which I can advocate, whether, it's just like finding the right community. So if you are already in those schools, then like emphasizing your experience, your credibility, your connection to the standards, that's what's really key.
And do you have, Karen's asking, do you have any online, have an online course to allow folks who do outreach to learn more about the program and learn techniques and ideas? Because you're not doing enough already, Monica.
Yeah, well, we focus on high school and college students, and that's why I'm so grateful that Animal Justice Academy exists, because I think that so much of your curriculum is really oriented towards other audiences.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I
I
and
think
that's like actually gets to like another thing that I've really been trying to focus on. Newz Institute used to do a lot, like a lot of
yes.
things, because we were passionate and because we saw opportunities to fundraise, via Tofurkey Trot, Screen Monday. The point is that we were doing a lot of different things. And I think that sometimes nonprofit organizations can be really prone to trying to be the entire animal
Yeah.
movement, like trying to do every single strategy and trying to get all the funding. Newz Institute is very clear. We do this one little thing. It's a big thing, but it's like one little thing in like the grand scheme of things. We work with high school and college students, and we will amplify the work of all of these partner organizations. So that is our contribution to this. We're not trying to take all the funding that's available in the entire space. We recognize our role, and we want to be able to do what we do really well.
I can't agree more, Monica. It's such a good point. I actually literally one of the things I always say is you don't need to change the whole damn world. You just need to find your corner of it and be really, really proficient at it.
Yeah, that's
So
why
yeah.
it's so important to be in networks, right? I
Mhm.
mean, Kimberly, part of the reason why we don't work with adults past, college is because we know that Animal Justice Academy exists, and we will talk about Animal Justice Academy all day with those
Yeah,
folks.
yeah. No, it's great. And like I said, I mean, there's this huge particular segment of the population, and because everybody's trying to do a little bit of everything, nobody until you guys were doing it. So I think that's so amazing. Jeannie's asking, Monica, have you worked with schools regarding alternatives in their science curriculum to dissection of animals like frogs? And to your point, you're probably not, because you're trying to focus, and there are already organizations that are doing that. I imagine it comes up though. There's probably some cross
Oh yeah, there's
referencing
always
there.
teachers that ask us about it, and then we'll reference, the PETA website, and there's actually great resources now that are out there of alternatives, so you don't actually have to dissect actual frogs anymore.
Mm-hmm. Ellen is asking, I have been interested in finding out if I would be a good match to be an educator in New Roots. I'm in the Chicago area. I'm 56. Am I too old to connect to the kids? Do you actually need younger people so that they can connect to the kids better? It's a good question.
It is such an interesting question, Ellen. I have had so many insecurities in my life. I was like, am I too short to be taken seriously? Am I, if I was a man, like if I was, sometimes when I was younger, I'd be like, I wish I was older. And then sometimes I'm like, I wish I was younger. It's not really about the bucket that you fit in. It's about like finding that way to relate. So you might have a barrier in that you do not know some of the Gen Z language that I have just been picking up. I talk about taking 0.3 selfies all day, every day now. But you have to spend time. You have to learn how to connect. That is really key. I don't think that the reason why you couldn't do it is because of your age.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I guess we know that one of the things we do know about high schoolers is they do tend to listen to some younger people a little bit more, but then they also probably listen to authority. So yeah, I guess it's a toss up, right? Yeah. So Monica, just as we're sort of going into our last couple of minutes, one more question, and then I got a question, one more question from our community. Watch Dominion is asking, how about having plant-based foods in schools? Which organizations are working on this initiative? Thanks. Now, I know that you are not directly working on this, but you are partnering with a lot of organizations on this. Can you speak to that a little?
Yes, so many organizations are working
Mm.
with students to change the food system. Um, so HSUS, as I mentioned, worked with our UCLA students, and one of our UCLA students even like took a job in dining, so that they could have access to some of the key decision makers, which is really key. There's a lot of groups. There's Switch for Good. There's People for there's the Better Food Foundation, and then also Greener by Default, Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. Remember how maybe it was 2 years ago now, one of our LA students, Marielle Williamson, she actually got a lot of media attention because with PCRM, they sued the entire school district of Los Angeles because she was getting in trouble for promoting or plant-based milks of some kind. So that's trying to change it on another level. There's a lot of different groups. In fact, I would argue that sometimes there's too many groups. I'm not saying that
Mm.
any of the groups should stop doing what they're doing, but I know that in one of the cities, there are 4 different groups reaching out to the same dining professional in the city because
Oh.
they want it to be like their very specific. Because we all have this general like we want to see like more plant-based foods, but sometimes it's like really labeled with like one specific organization. And if those organizations aren't coordinating, it can end up with like each of them individually reaching out to the dining and nutrition person at the representing the school district. So
Yeah. So lots going on, just not necessarily as coordinated as it would be great to see it be. And in Canada, again, it's a little bit more patchwork. We have also HSI Canada and their Forward Food Program doing some work with universities. We have Eleanor Carrera, who is an HAer, doing work on transitioning universities. But not a lot going on, honestly, not a lot going on in our regular school system. So that's just to put that little bug in your ear, Monica.
noted.
um, okay, so last thing I just want to ask you before we sign off here is can you share just a couple of reactions that students have had that you've sort of heard of or experienced yourself through this program that really touched you or that really sort of made you go, oh yeah, this is why I need to do what I'm doing here? Anything that you can recall? I know I'm putting you on the spot, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's such a sweet question. Every year we do a celebration, and my colleague Keith in Ohio person, really reach out to Keith. I encourage it. Um, has been facilitating a poem, like a group poem where everybody contributes. And arts activism, by the way, is also something that is very neglected sometimes, and we forget about the power of art. And
Absolutely.
hearing the students talk about how they realize that they're not only one voice because they're part of this larger network, and how they don't feel like they have to do everything by themselves and they understand their piece to it, like that is beautiful to me.
Mm.
Um, Especially as somebody who, of course, felt very alone doing this work when I was younger. They also
Yes.
recently did a poem about leadership as well. And as I mentioned earlier, I've been very concerned that like some students have really opened up to me about how they've wondered if their lives are even worth living if they can't be as influential or impactful as Gandhi and Martin Luther King. And I'm just sort of like, gosh, we really like have this hero story. And I mean, I taught elementary school. I talked about Martin Luther King as well, and we gave him a day. And no disrespect to Dr. King, but if we only focus on those people, I think that it can impact our students who are really concerned about the state of the world and their own impact. So it means a lot to me that our students, some of whom are quiet, can still recognize that they are leaders. That it's not just about being the charismatic person out in front. And I just feel like we're in a new era of the animal movement, like where it's like there's just more opportunities to be involved, more ways to think and to question. And I appreciate all of you for asking all these questions and thinking about like what should we be doing. It just means so much to me because I think that part of the reason there's sometimes like animosity in our space is because we're so like we're right. Like we are, first of all, a lot of us are traumatized because we've seen such terrible things like Dominion. um,
Yeah, yeah.
but it's just really like how I'm excited about this like next phase where we're thinking about like how we contribute to like this broader network of change.
How we can weave ourselves more into everything and how we can weave everything into us. I think it's a big thing, and I love your attitude, Monica. I love your approach. And I think let's take it back to the gallery view, Kirsten, so we can see everybody. We've still got tons of people hanging on to every word. And if you can't see everybody, Monica, just go back to the gallery view. AJers, can we please show Monica our appreciation for being here and for all the work she does? A big thank you, Monica. Yay.
But seriously, I do not do this work by myself. Like it's truly.
I know. It sounds like you have
Pretty
an
is here,
incredible
like
team. Yeah, absolutely. And so exciting to know, to follow this path. And I hope folks here are feeling inspired not just by this program and working with youth, but I loved what Monica said about folks, you just find, what are you best at? Where do you make the best impact? Where do you care the most? Where can you be consistent? Where can you really contribute in your very own unique way in your corner of the world? Grab it and go for it. So thank you, Monica. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you in 2 weeks for our next Lunchtime Live. Stay tuned. I'll send out info about that. And in the meantime, have a wonderful week, everyone. Take care. Bye, Monica.
Bye.